Good evening, universe. It is spooky season. It's almost Halloween, so I'm going to be talking about some of the spooky books that I've read this year. And by some, I mean all of them. I was originally going to do a tier ranking video, but there's only 7 books here, so I thought it would be kind of silly to do a tier ranking list just for 7 books, but I am going to give you my thoughts about them. At least I think it's 7. We'll see if that's correct. So I'm just going to tell you about what I thought about each of them. This is my first year reading what I'm calling spooky books, so like thrillers, horror, that sort of thing. Usually I really only read fantasy. I have in the past read a couple of like self-help books or just regular fiction, but this year I wanted to branch out a little bit. So I wanted to try some genres that were a little bit different. So these are the spooky books that I read this year and what I thought about each of them. The first spooky book that I read was a thriller. It's called In a Dark, Dark Wood, and it is by Ruth Ware. At the time, I was a little bit unsure of what to think because it wasn't a fantasy. It was my first time not reading a fantasy in a really long time. So I had kind of a hard time evaluating it. But even at the time, I felt kind of meh about certain things. And definitely in retrospect, I feel very meh about it now. I think it was fine, I guess. But I'm not going to read anything else by this author just because it didn't grab me that much. And there are other authors that I've been enjoying since then that I just have liked a lot more. This was fine. I don't really remember too much about it at this point, but the premise is basically that the main woman, whose name I do not remember, she is like a writer. She's very much like a homebody. She doesn't go out or anything like that, but she gets invited to go to a hen weekend, I think is what it's called, which is basically just like a bachelorette party weekend type thing, from a very old friend. She agrees to go, spooky stuff ensues, there's a mystery, and then you get kind of this dual perspective where she's in the hospital trying to figure out what happened over the weekend, and then you get like the flashback to the actual weekend. Like I said, I thought it was fine, but I really don't feel strongly about it one way or the other. It was a very quick read, so that was cool. And the thrills were pretty fun. The mystery was pretty fun, but I didn't really enjoy any of the characters, and especially in contrast with some of the books that I've read since then, this really doesn't fall into what I'm looking for in a thriller. This next book, I don't know if it counts as a thriller or just a mystery, but it is let me look it up. Okay, so it is classed as a mystery / suspense novel. So I'm going to call it Suspense from now on. One of Us is Lying is the name of the book. It's by Kari McManus. This one is for young adults. I thought I would enjoy the pacing a little bit more because I tend to read YA more than I read adult, and I really enjoyed this one. I loved the characters, I loved their adventures, I loved the mystery, and what ends up being like the truth. I loved the reveal of that. All of that was fantastic. I think this is probably her most well-known novel, and I think it's her debut. But basically what this is there are 5 teenagers who go to detention, and they're all from kind of different walks of life. You know, they're different like character archetypes. So you have like a jock and a nerd and a beauty queen and bad boy. Oh, and also you have this gossipy outcast guy who runs this, it's basically like a gossip blog about their school, but everything that he says on there is always completely correct, and that's Simon. And Simon is important because he dies right away. This is the inciting incident for the book. Basically, he dies in such a way that people think that there is foul play involved. And now they're trying to figure out, it's during detention that he dies. And now they're trying to figure out which one of the 4 killed him, because it would be wild if it was somebody who wasn't in the room, right? Additionally, he had a post that hadn't gone up yet, but that was going to go up that had like a secret about each of them. So you follow each of their perspectives as they all try and unravel exactly what happened. And I really enjoyed this book. Like I said, the characters were great. I loved the development of them. There were some moments with certain characters' parents that hit really close to home, and I absolutely loved this. It has since then propelled me to pick up 2 more books by this same author, including the next one, which was Two Can Keep a Secret, again by Karen McManus, of course. And this one is about basically a girl goes to her mom's hometown. And the main girl, her name is Ellery, she is obsessed with true crime because her aunt went missing when her aunt was a teenager, basically. Her mom's twin went missing. And I enjoyed this just as much as I enjoyed One of Us is Lying. This was a fabulous suspense novel. It had a lot of great mystery. I loved the characters. Once again, we follow Ellery as mysterious things start happening in this town that she is visiting. And also we follow a guy whose name I can't remember right now. But he basically more recently, I think it was a couple of years before the events of the book, a young lady is murdered and her body is found. And so everybody blames her death on her boyfriend. The guy that we follow is the younger brother of the boyfriend that everybody thinks was the murderer in that case. I wish I could remember his name. Anyway, so we follow those 2 characters. I loved both of them. I thought, once again, the mystery was good. The solution to the mystery, I thought, was really fantastic. The perpetrator of the mystery was really suitably monstrous. And so I thought it was really good. Some days I think that I enjoy this even more than One of Us is Lying just because it's so, vibey. The town is small and it's kind of misty. Everything's kind of dark. So I like the atmosphere of this book a little bit more than I like the atmosphere in One of Us is Lying, because that's just high school. This spends less time in a school, and so it's a little bit more interesting to me, although there is still plenty of school stuff. They also spend a lot of time at a spooky amusement park, which I thought was really fun. And overall, I thought this was really well done. This is going out of order that I read them now, but I'm lumping all the Karen McManus books together. So this next one was The Cousins. And I had heard that this one was not so great. And I kind of figured, well, I trust this author a lot. I've really been enjoying her books. I'll probably enjoy it anyway. And I don't know if at this point I was just kind of falling out of interest with these suspense novels, but I ended up DNFing this one. Basically what it's about is 3 people who are cousins. The explanation is going to be kind of weird, so let me back up a little bit. Basically, there were a bunch of kids of a very wealthy woman, and they're called, I think, the 4 A's because all of their names begin with A. It's like Archer and Allison and Adam and another one. And they are all, the descendants of a very wealthy lady. But then out of nowhere, when they're adults, she denounces them and cuts them off completely. And now they'll never see her fortune. And all she says is, "You know what you did." So the book follows not them, but a child of each of them. Each of them has a child, not each of them. 3 of them have children. And those 3 children are the ones that we follow. So those are their cousins, hence the name. I'm not describing this well. But basically their parents all want to figure out what happened because of all their parents claim that we don't know what we did to deserve this, and they want to get back into our good graces. And so it follows the cousins where they're invited to go to the island where their grandma lives and work at her resort. And that's what it's about. And there's, once again, mystery, and each character has a secret, and it seemed fun, but it just wasn't holding on to me very well. And I had just pushed through a different book that I didn't really end up enjoying all that much. And so I really didn't have the reading energy to do that again with this one. So I decided to DNF it. However, I will be trying to read other books by Karen McManus. I think this was just kind of a fluke. I do believe in her as an author, and I'm going to be trying some of her other novels the next time I feel in the mood for a suspense book. Okay, so I was just looking at my list of all the spooky books that I read this year, and this next one doesn't really count, so I'm just going to talk about it briefly. It's Come Tumbling Down by Seanan McGuire, and this is really more of a fantasy, but it does take place in a world that is based on Gothic horror and has Gothic horror elements. That's why I included it. So just really quickly, I absolutely loved this. I loved going back to that world and the adventure that they go on. I like the characters that it follows. This is in the Wayward Children series, where I think it's every even numbered book, we go through a magical doorway to a magical world, kind of like Narnia. And every odd numbered book, we follow some kids that are in this world trying to deal with the fact that they don't get to live in their doorway worlds anymore. I love this series. This is one of my favorites of the series as well. I really like The Moors, which is the name of the Gothic horror world. So if you enjoy fantasies, I recommend it. I do recommend that you read Down Among the Sticks and Bones first, though, if you haven't read other books in the series. So then there was Mexican Gothic, which I ended up DNFing. I mentioned this briefly before, but I was really enjoying it. It seems like I really would have liked the main character if I had read it through. However, there were some elements that were just a little bit too stomach turning for me, and so I put it down. But from what I got from reading it is basically this is a Gothic horror. It's set in 1940s, I think, Mexico. It's definitely set in Mexico. It's either 1920s or 1940s. And I really loved the setting. It's very atmospheric, spooky, dark. Part of the horror of it was a little bit gross for me in a way. I don't want to describe what it was because of spoilers, but it was just a little bit too icky for me, so I went ahead and put it down. It follows a young woman, Naomi, I think her name is, Noemi. I think it's Noemi. Basically, her cousin is acting very strangely and writes this rambling letter full of accusations of wild, terrible stuff happening, and her father, Noemi's father, convinces Noemi to go find out what's going on. And so she goes to this very spooky house and tries to get to the bottom of the mystery. I don't know how it pans out, but I have heard a lot of great things about it. Okay, so the next one isn't really a thriller or a horror or anything like that. It's a memoir, but it's a memoir written by a mortician about her time as a mortuary assistant. And her name is Caitlin Doughty, and I found this super fascinating. It really wasn't spooky or scary to me at all. It's basically just talking about ways that dead bodies are processed and handled. It kind of goes into the various ways that we process death and grief, and she thinks about and extrapolates on her ideas about why we react to death in certain ways and how we might be able to fix some of our relationship with death and with dead bodies. Really interesting, really funny. She has a really dark sense of humor that I really enjoyed. I absolutely loved this, and I'll probably be reading her other books. It also had a lot of really interesting information about death rituals. That was probably my favorite part of the memoir overall. I enjoyed the parts that were a little bit more about her, but my favorite part was definitely learning about the various rituals in different cultures and different ideas about how we handle funerary rites. Then I picked up House of Hollow. This is a YA, I guess I would say this is suspense again. It has some paranormal elements as well. It's about these three sisters, the youngest of which is a teenager, the Hollow sisters, their last name is Hollow, who go missing when they're children. And then they come back, but they come back weird. Their hair turns white, their eyes turn black, not like the whole thing, but their irises, and they're like ethereally beautiful. Their dad notices that even though their adult teeth had came in, they got another set of teeth that came through. Weird stuff. People have always reacted to them in weird ways. They've always been kind of obsessive and weird about them. There's not a normal level of interest in the Hollow sisters. They never figure out where they went missing, and it's very strange because they're on this big empty alley when they go missing, and their parents are right there. They look away and then they turn back and then they're gone, and they're missing for a month and then they come back. So that's in the past of the novel. But what this follows is the eldest sister has gone missing. So it follows the two younger sisters, Iris and Vivi, as they try and find out where their sister has gone. This was another one that I felt was fine. I didn't really like the mingling of suspense with supernatural elements. I wasn't really enjoying that, especially the type of supernatural elements that they were, but I think that's really more just personal. I don't think there was anything wrong with it. It's just my personal taste, which I guess all of this is, so I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I didn't really like it. The characters were interesting and engaging a decent amount, but I didn't really get super attached to any of them. There were a lot of moments when I felt like it dragged. I knew that this story was really heavy on vibes, and I thought that that would be okay with me, but it seemed like it lingered a little bit too much, and there were a lot of parts that I felt like, why are we doing this? It just didn't feel like it was moving at a pace that I liked. It was very slow, and because I didn't have the characters to carry me through that, it didn't really work for me that well. However, I did finish it because I had just DNF'd Mexican Gothic, so I went ahead and finished reading it, and it was fine. I also want to say that this is around the same time that I started reading The Cousins, and I think I might have just started falling out of my interest in suspense novels, might have just been kind of tapering off, so that could be playing into my general opinion for this as well. And on a similar kind of note, I also read Hide, an adult thriller, I think. It's either a thriller or a horror. I'm not totally sure. I didn't finish this one either. I picked this one up because I really enjoy Kierstan White's other books. I've read And I Darken and Now I Rise, and I really enjoyed both of those. I also really enjoyed her Camelot Rising series, which it starts with the Guinevere Deception. Absolutely loved that series. So I thought I would enjoy this book as well, and it was really feeling like I was going to. The pacing, so good. It feels so tense the entire time that you're reading it. The way that she writes just makes you feel really like, what's going to happen? Like every little thing seems like it matters so much. And I think that's really successful in a suspense novel. However, like I said, I was kind of feeling my interest in suspense novels, thrillers, that sort of thing, sort of tapering off at this point. And there was an element to this that was just a little bit too much of a bummer for me to continue. The backstory of the main character is very heartbreaking and was a little bit too much for me. However, I do think it is really well done, and if you are a fan of suspense/thriller books and you haven't read this yet, I would highly recommend it from what I read. From the small part, I think I read like 80 pages. It goes really fast too. It's also really fast paced. Yeah, so it seemed like it was interesting to me. And those were all of the spooky books I read. I think I'm done with the thriller/suspense type book for a while. I'm going to be branching out of fantasy in a different way going forward, which you'll probably find out about soon with a wrap up. But those were all the spooky books I read. If there are any based on these that I liked and didn't like that you think I would enjoy, please tell me, because I am still very new to non-fantasy things and I'm really interested in checking more out eventually once I feel like I burned myself out on them. Once I recover and it's been a while, maybe next summer, I'm going to want to get back into it, and so I'm going to want more recommendations. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and have a beautiful night, universe.